permission to come aboard.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
And here we go.
Live from the Hollywood foothills of North Carolina, welcome to the 108th edition of the Confirmed Epic Podcast, the official podcast of theepicreview.com, and proudly presented by the Geeks Worldwide Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, the real Brad Bell, and joining me once again tonight for the second week in a row, I'm so proud of us, the master of the universe himself, Jerry Reed, also known as
Barbecue 17. What's going on, everybody?
You sound great, Jerry. Coming in loud and clear. I know you're
loud and clear. Hopefully, with no internet issues tonight. I have a good feeling about this.
I have a really good feeling about this. I have a bad feeling about this, actually, because this is the second week in a row our main topic is going to be Star Wars. Now, it is comfort food, yes.
Yeah, I'm really happy. There's a few places I like to be right now. With my family be one of them, but a few places other than that where I'd like to be other than talking about Star Wars movies here with you, Brad.
Yeah, same. So I think I may pitch another comfort food idea for you at the end of this podcast. We'll see how this goes, and I want to get your reaction on the air. So if we get to the end of the podcast and I forget to pitch that, you'll have to forgive me.
No problem at all.
So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the show tonight with what we've been checking out this week.
Check checklist? Check. Double checking of checklist? Check.
Jerry Reed, during this COVID-19 shutdown, what have you been checking out, my friend?
Well, I beat Resident Evil 3, playing on Xbox One, and it's kind of proud, with me just being the only one here, I was able to play Resident Evil 3 a good bit more than I would usually, get to play it when my wife and my little one are around. So I got to beat it. Actually, I'm almost probably like 3/4 of the way through now on, it's called hardcore mode. So I think it's like the next, the hardest difficulty you can get without having to unlock it. So
how did it feel to get those achievements unlocked? It's been a long time since I felt that on the Xbox.
Yeah, I always enjoy it. I really like the achievement system. I don't play Xbox. I still play it. I just don't play it as much as I do my Switch, because I just tend to play the Switch more right now. But it was good. Resident Evil 3 was very good. It wasn't as good as 2, which it was a lot shorter, and 2 is a larger game overall. Like there's 2 playable characters that have their own separate stories, and you can play like a B campaign. Like if you play with did you ever play 2? I think we talked last time.
No, I've only played 4, which coincidentally enough, I saw that they are looking to do a remake for that. I read that this week, and that's a pretty beautiful game. But no, really 4 with Leon's the only one that I ever deep dove into and actually beat.
Yeah. Leon was one of the original protagonists in Resident Evil 2. And then there was a lady named Claire Redfield, who was the younger sister of a character from the first game. And you could actually play the campaign with either one of them to start. And it would actually be different. It was, some of the areas were the same, but it was had a lot of differences. But then say if you played with Leon, then you could play a B campaign with Claire that would sort of be like the other half of that story. It was kind of cool. And this one, you do have 2 characters, but you swap them during the game. You have Jill, Valentine, and Carlos. But it was very fun. I mean, I really enjoyed playing it. It was weird. This is one of those things that's weird with a remake, though. So Resident Evil 2, because they did that remake last year, it felt like they took everything from the original game and then added more to it. And this one, there were some scenes that were noticeably missing. Things I remembered from the original game.
Anything that altered the story, any?
It didn't really alter the story too much. But, you know, some of the environments, like there was a graveyard, like kind of a park graveyard area in Resident Evil 3. And I remember, you know, feeling very different because it was like this outside area. You know, things were coming out of the ground. And I mean, that area is just not in the game. There was like a whole clock tower area that was not really in this game. And that was a big part in when they made the movie, you know, the Resident Evil 2 movie. They used a lot of the scenes from that clock tower levels, you know, in the movie. So
we briefly
cool. I beat it.
We touched on this last week. You had started playing it and you finished it this week. I just want to throw something at you. What video game would you like to see remade kind of in this style that hasn't been done yet? Anything off the top of your head?
I was kind of thinking about that earlier. You know, Final Fantasy VII just came out.
Yeah.
And that is huge. I honestly am contemplating buying a PlayStation finally. I haven't had a PlayStation since PlayStation 2.
Just hold out for the PS5, Jerry. It's coming in November.
But that's the thing. The games, I think, are going to be more compatible now, like with the Xbox, where you would, you know, and now they're they're fairly inexpensive. But one of the ones I was thinking about was I really loved Metal Gear Solid.
That's what I was going to say. Like the original Metal Gear. Yeah.
They did remake it kind of for GameCube. They did a remake for GameCube. It was called Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes.
I remember that one.
But again, we're talking, how many years has that been now?
15 years ago.
I know Metal Gear has been a series that's had installments, you know, coming out over time, but I really love the original Metal Gear Solid, and I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it redone. I think it would be one that would be a worthy. Another one that is not probably going to happen is do you remember Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem for GameCube?
I do not remember Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem for GameCube.
It was it was fairly popular at the time. There was a lot of work towards, I think, a second one as well. But it was a survival horror game. It was not unlike Resident Evil, but it actually had it borrowed a lot from like H.P. Lovecraft, kind of like Lovecraft mythology and things. But you play as this character who's going back to her, I think it's her grandfather's mansion, that he's just died and she's kind of the only living relative. And there's this whole story that takes place in different periods of time. And so she's reading this story, you're going back and playing as these characters, like a Roman centurion or, I think there's like a World War I soldier at one point. But as the characters are interacting with, the various monstrosities and whatnot, their sanity is they're losing their grip on their sanity. And so the game would do weird stuff. Like you'd be running and all of a sudden it would look like your character was like, falling into the floor, like clipping into the floor, and then it would flash and be back to normal. Or it looked like your volume was going up on the TV, or you get like a thing that said, error, memory card read. And then it would do things that felt like it was
memory cards. That brings back great memories right there.
So, but that was one. The other one, and this is a franchise. This is an old Nintendo game. I remember my dad bringing it home. It was called Monster Party on the original NES, and it's about this kid that's like coming home from baseball practice, and this alien shows up and tells him he needs his help. And it was a side scroller. It was kind of like Castlevania. But you fought, all these various monsters and whatnot. And one of the game mechanics is the kid had a baseball bat. So most of the monsters shot stuff, and you knocked things back at the monsters. You knocked their projectiles back at them. But it was just a really fun horror game that seemed like it was kind of a catch-all. Had all these, there's like a plant that's clearly like Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. There's all the classic, monsters and whatnot are in there. And it just seems like a franchise. I think it was a Konami game, and it's so weird that no one's ever did anything with it because it seems like a franchise that would do really well. That could really take that name and some of those ideas and do something pretty cool with them.
So Jerry Reed, he's on the video games during this shutdown, which is awesome that you kind of get to deep dive into those types of things. One of the things I've been deep diving into is some comics, trying to get caught up on some Batman because, like you, I've been reading a lot of Star Wars books kind of leading up to the Rise of Skywalker as we stick with that Star Wars theme. So using this time to go back and catch up on some comics. And one of my favorite writers as far as Batman and DC has been concerned over the past I'd say 5 or 6 years probably, is Peter Tomasi, which you're familiar with Peter Tomasi, right, Jerry?
Yeah. New 52, didn't he do the Batman? He wrote Batman and Robin, right?
Yeah, with Yes, that's exactly right. With Patrick Gleason doing the art. And I believe Tomasi actually did some art on his own, not for that book, but for other books in the past. And he's been one of these who has transitioned to being a writer very well, whereas some people like Tony Daniel, when they were writing Detective early on in the New 52, some of that wasn't up to par. It was beautiful, and it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't up to par with some of the better Batman stories. So I was really interested to see where Detective was going to go, because I know you've been a little behind on DC trades and whatnot, but you're still fairly caught up. Well, you're caught up compared to some people. Some people haven't read into Rebirth. And the James Tynion run on Detective, which I know you read some with the Clayface team.
I definitely did. That was great.
That was a great run. That was one of the better runs.
Early Detective during Rebirth was definitely some of the best stuff. I love the Detective team.
I did too. That was just a great concept. It was a team book for Batman, but it was in the flagship Batman book besides Batman, of course, being Detective. And there was a bit of a lull between Tynion and Tomasi, but Tomasi's coming on, and his first arc is called Mythology. That's volume 1. I read through that one. It kind of took you through a weird amalgamation of Bruce Wayne's greatest foes, and it kind of kept you guessing the whole time. So that was fairly decent. I'd probably rate that a good 1.5. But what I really wanted to talk about tonight was volume 2. It was again, we had Peter Tomasi. In volume 2, you had art by Brad Walker. And Jerry, this is the really first big attempt to bring the Arkham Knight into mainstream DC continuity. Now, don't get me wrong, there had been Arkham Knight comics kind of to tie in with the video game going back to that.
They were in the Arkhamverse. They were their own thing.
So now we're bringing him into I won't reveal who it is, him or her, because I will tell you it's different than the reveal in the game of who the Arkham Knight is. And
okay. I think that's kind of needed. I mean, obviously that's needed because it would make no sense otherwise.
Yeah, and they take a character that Tom King had kind of established during his run on Batman, and now you read some of the earlier Tom King stuff, right? I know you're not completely caught up.
To the wedding that didn't really happen.
Okay, no, that's a good dropping off point, unfortunately. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you can help me out here, that Tom King, he didn't bring this character in fully, I don't think, but he kind of played with this character a little more than some other Bat writers. It was the character of Dr. Arkham, who runs Arkham Asylum. And he is a major...
Jeremiah Arkham, or is this a different...
No, the one you just said. Repeat that name for the listeners.
Jeremiah.
And what they do with his story, they really give you an origin story with him, but not too deep of a dive. But some of the other stuff they tie into him, I'm not going to say any further because I don't want to spoil it. It's just some of the better Batman origin storytelling that I have read in quite some time. You know, the Batman has such a great rogues gallery. And it's so easy to just do a traditional take on the Joker, Catwoman, Riddler, Penguin, you name it. But to tackle a character like Arkham Knight, who is known, but known for a completely different medium, and then transition them into comics in such a powerful way, kind of reminds me with what happened with Harley Quinn in the animated series. She starts out in the animated series, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, then you have the whole Mad Love comic. and the rest is history with Harley Quinn. I'm not saying that's going to happen with this version of the Arkham Knight, but it kind of left me with a kind of a lighter feeling, a similar feeling to that, and it was almost, dare I say, Nolan-esque. Tomasi's writing in Volume 2 is very grounded compared to Volume 1, which kind of left for a little bit of uneven storytelling. But I was not the biggest fan of Arkham Knight, the Return of the Batmobile, as we like to call it, where it seemed like you played.
A lot of Batmobile in that game.
I know, it's almost a joke among us at this point how much that was probably the last time I really played video games, was playing as the Batmobile in Arkham Knight.
It was a very good game overall, but
I think most people would agree with that for sure.
How much they wanted you to use the Batmobile?
And we're not gonna spoil who Arkham Knight is in the game or in the comic. But this fresh direction they take the character is worth checking out. So if you're kind of on the fence about Detective, just go ahead, pick up those first 2 volumes. Maybe wait till they come on the DC Universe app. I know Amazon's only switching to essential shipping right now during this crisis, but I'm telling you, this is well worth checking out. So, Jerry, is there anything else you've been checking out this week?
I totally know I probably put something else on the what did I put on the list? I've got my list closed. What did I put on there?
Yes, you have Joe Hill, and you have you have one of Joe Hill's books that you checked out, I believe, our stories called Full Throttle.
Full Throttle. Yeah. Oh no, I just finished it this week. So, Joe Hill is one of my favorite authors, kind of horror, weird fiction. He's Stephen King's son. You knew that, right, Brad?
Yep, I knew that because of you, Jared.
Oh. Okay. So Full Throttle is an anthology. He's actually put out quite a few anthologies of short stories. His original, the work that got him a lot of attention was an anthology called 20th Century Ghosts. And anyways, Full Throttle is a collection of stories. A lot of them have appeared in other places. And Full Throttle, so there's a lot of tribute stories in here. There's a lot of stories that are kind of like that he wrote for different tribute volumes. And so, like, one of them, the first one is called Full Throttle. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Matheson, but he wrote a lot of episodes of The Twilight Zone. Most famously, the one where William Shatner sees the gargoyle or the gremlin on the wing of the airplane. But Richard Matheson was a horror writer. He died maybe 10 years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. Wrote Legend of Hell House, wrote I Am Legend, What Dreams May Come.
Oh, great movie.
He wrote a story one time that was called Duel, and Steven Spielberg actually turned it into a movie. And it's about this business guy who's on this trip kind of out in the desert, and this trucker just is chasing him this whole movie. He has no idea why. And so, Joe Hill, for a collection, I think it was called He Is Legend. It was a tribute collection to Richard Matheson. Him and Stephen King wrote this story called Full Throttle. And it's a similar premise that this biker gang, kind of like a Sons of Anarchy, this biker gang that's getting involved in some illicit stuff. They are suddenly, chased by this truck, and they have no idea why this guy's chasing them. They have no idea what he wants, and he's just taking out these gang members. But there's a lot of stories in this book, and that's the interesting thing is Joe Hill goes back and forth between, so many different genres of horror. Like he does stuff with a more fantasy. There's one story where these very, very ultra wealthy men are hunting, and this one guy ends up saving saving this other guy's son's life. And so the guy says, I want to do something for you. And he invites him to this exclusive hunting club where this guy has found this door into a fantasy world. And so these like ultra elite, ultra wealthy 1%ers go into this fantasy world to hunt like, fauns and satyrs and trolls and all this stuff. So it's kind of like a
it's Eric Trump, it's Jared Kushner. Is that the cast of characters here we're talking about?
We're talking about definitely people where it's like heads of pharmaceutical companies and these folks that are have more money than they know what to do with. But it's kind of like a dark tribute to the Narnia. I mean, it feels like Narnia at times, but it's a different thing about, imagine someone going over to this other world and for hunting, to trophy hunt. The last story in there, and I was not my favorite in the book, but it's in The Tall Grass, which was turned into a Netflix movie.
I did watch that. I did watch that Netflix movie. It has
I have not seen the movie yet, but I just finished the story, so I may watch it at some point.
Patrick Wilson is the main star in that movie. Patrick Wilson, good old Night Owl.
Oh, okay. Night Owl and oh my gosh,
Conjuring. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Anyways, I mean, it's a really really cool little collection. I mean, most of the stories are 30, 40 pages or so. So it's each story is not very long, but I mean, if you really do, if you enjoy horror, if you like Stephen King, where it kind of goes to all these different genres, just kind of weird fiction in general, it definitely was a very strong collection. So the best story in here, though, and I'm you might count this as minor spoilers. It's a story about a guy that his parents commit suicide. That his dad is dying of dementia, and his mom might have cancer, or his dad has dementia and his mom's dying of cancer, and so they decide to go out on their own terms. And this guy ends up moving back home to take care of their affairs. And they leave a library book that they checked out. His parents met in a library years ago. And so they leave a library book for him to return. And he ends up going to this little library in this small town and driving this bookmobile. And the bookmobile is this old, 60s style van. It's got all this weird, psychedelic graphics on the side. But sometimes when he drives the bookmobile, it goes back in time. And he is able to go back and meet people at a point in their life where they need to read a certain book.
That's pretty cool.
One example is there's a mother that he meets, and he's talking with her, and he realizes that it's this mom, that her son's in Vietnam. She just got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she hasn't heard from her son in a couple months, and she's concerned, she's worried, and he's able to give her a book that her son wrote coming back Vietnam, and it turns out that her son became a prominent author, and he's able to pass this book to her. But when he passes the book to her from the bookmobile, it actually changes. Like a book might have a cover that looks like what you'd see today, but when he passes it, the font, the cover, and everything changes for the person to a book that looks like something that, would be from their era. But he's able to go back in time, and he doesn't know how or why, and give people the book that they need at a certain time.
That's very cool, and it sounds like you could get some heartfelt stories kind of mixed in with that horror suspense element of Joe Hill. So I would be interested to check that out.
Yeah, like Stephen King, and again, he in the intro to this, he acknowledges he is his father's son. He grew up here.
Unlike Kylo Ren. Unlike Kylo Ren.
He grew up hearing those stories and growing up in that stuff, and has come to love it. So, but you got to think about as you as a parent and me as a parent, it's pretty cool to think about that you could share something you love so much with your child, and that when they get older, that they love it too.
I love doing that. You're seeing this with our kids now as they're younger, but just to see them share joy in the things that you love.
Absolutely. You got to imagine that. I mean, Stephen King is probably like, just so proud that his son. Not only that his son is a prominent, fantastic author, but that he loves the stuff he loves. That he had that impact on him.
And
So
he's made
it's
a
pretty
name
cool.
for himself, and he didn't use King; he used Joe Hill. So I think
Yep.
that's pretty cool. But speaking of
And
stuff,
he really did try to keep it pretty secret for a number of years.
but the
It's a
cat's
good
out of the
book.
bag. It's been out of the bag for a while. I mean, when you have like Lock and Key, that's Joe Hill, right? As a Netflix
Joe
special, and just such a vast library of things that he's got out there now. It's kind of hard to keep that back, and I think it's cool that he's embracing that, as you said. Speaking of stuff we loved as a kid, I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but I have to talk about it because I got so many texts from friends asking me had I seen this, and I stumbled upon it on Facebook. It was Teenage Mutant Middle-Aged Turtles. It was an SNL parody cartoon short. SNL was unique this week because it was all kind of done like remote because of COVID.
Yeah.
They didn't do it live, and
Tom Hanks there.
Yeah, a lot of cool stuff, kind of riffing on Zoom and what has become our current culture, unfortunately, because of this coronavirus. But man, not just to see these turtles that you love, usually stuff that's kind of irreverent about stuff I held dear as a child or in my younger years rubs me the wrong way. But they never, I mean, I guess they did kind of go dark in some spots with it, but they didn't go.
Pretty dark a couple times, but yeah, I liked it. It was funny.
Yeah, but it was never like too over the top. Like there was a Power Rangers short movie that came out not too long. It was remember this?
Yeah, we talked about that on here. Yeah.
It was like the Zack the Black Ranger was doing cocaine and like all kinds of crazy stuff. Like nothing like that here. But it's just you have a great. Here's what I loved about this the most. It was only like 2 minutes and 42 seconds, but they managed to really hit on the Raphael and Leonardo dynamic in such a unique and comedic way that only something like SNL could. I don't even watch golf.
Yeah, I don't even watch it.
Did you hear about Shredder? No, what happened? He died. What?
Should we go to his funeral?
No, the wake, but not the funeral. Yeah.
Yeah, the wake, but not the funeral.
Oh, it was hilarious.
The part that cracked me up the most after it happened. Oh my gosh, is it Donatello who gets the phone call from his doctor about a strange like mass on his spine?
Yes.
Yeah, Donatello gets this call. I mean, again, it has a theme music, but it starts with April. It's hard. I mean, we're sitting here talking longer about a skit than it really is.
Yeah.
But it starts with like April talking to a guy named Mike about this is over. She doesn't love him anymore. And then it goes to the camera, and it's Michelangelo, but the turtles look old. And when I first saw the image, I thought it was a King of a Hill parody for some reason, because there's four of them just standing there.
I did too.
When I first saw just the image of it, but Donatello gets a call from his doctor, and she's like, "We found this strange mass," and she goes on this whole call, and he's like, "Yeah," and she's like, "It was a benign polyp. Everything's okay." But so, I graduated from high school in 2002. So September 11th happened during my senior year, and our school had all these blood drives, that came into the school, and so I went and donated. Probably the first time I donated blood because I just turned 18, and a couple weeks later I got a call from the Red Cross, or somebody called and they said, "Is this Jerry?" Da da da, and I'm like, "Yes," and they're like, "Mr. Reed, for security reasons, we need to confirm some information." And, so I'm like confirming this information from them. And they're like, "There's a problem with your blood." And I'm like, "Oh, gosh, what's going on?" And they're like, "Mr. Reed, you said that in like spring of 2001, you'd went to Mexico." And I did. I went on a mission trip. And they're like,
was that the mayonnaise trip?
What?
Is that the infamous mayonnaise trip?
No, that was a different trip.
Okay.
So, no, I hated mayonnaise long before that point.
Okay.
But anyways, so I I'm like, oh gosh, and they're like, you said you went to Matamoros, Mexico, and I'm like, yeah, and they're like, yes, was that the Matamoros in like this province or that province? And I'm like, I don't know, it's the one like right across the Texas border, and they're like, oh, okay, thank you so much for donating, and then like they just hung up.
And you were like, shoo, like
I know, it was
Donnie
like
in this.
12-minute phone call, like all this confirmation, and Mr. Reed, there's a problem with your blood. So I understood Donatello's fear there. That's what it made me think of. As soon as I saw that, I could relate.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll get into maybe a bit of epic news, but our main topic where we're going to count down our favorite Star Wars movies. Let's get into some epic news, Jerry. There was a story today from Vanity Fair I just can't resist. So we got our first official image from Denis Villeneuve's big screen adaptation of the science fiction masterpiece, apparently. I have not read it. Dune. I think it's Roger Herbert. Maybe I'm wrong, who actually wrote that book. Maybe you can correct me on that. And it gave us an image of
I think it's Richard Herbert.
Richard Herbert. And I believe his son came in and finished the later books.
Frank Herbert is Dune.
Okay, Frank Herbert.
Richard Herbert, can't remember his son's name.
It's Herbert something. So you and I obviously don't know a ton about Dune. I haven't read it. You haven't read it. Now, for me, that's not surprising. I don't read any non-comic books other than Star Wars novels or Michael Crichton stuff usually. So no big surprise there. That being said, Jerry, you've kind of read most of the, at least dabbled in, maybe not completed, most of the big, well-known properties of science fiction and fantasy, at least a little here and there. Like, you've read some Wheel of Time, right? You've read some Game of Thrones. Exactly. And those, again, that's a very long-running book series, and Amazon's got an adaptation.
I'm starting it again yesterday.
Yeah, well, now's the time, but it could also be the time to start Dune. So Vanity Fair is going to have, I think, it's going to be their cover story on their next issue, and I subscribe to Vanity Fair. My wife enjoys reading it, and I like their website and their podcast, so hopefully we'll actually get that in the mail. But they're going to do a kind of big cover spread like they did with Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker and Avengers Endgame and some of these massive who's of tentpole movies. But the image they released today was of Timothee Chalamet, who is one of the best young actors in Hollywood. And he looks like he is dressed as Kylo Ren here, but he's not. He is, I may be mispronouncing this, Dune fans, Paul Atreides? Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Sounds pretty similar.
Okay.
Pretty correct.
Now, I want you to hear the cast of this movie, Jerry. Oscar Isaac. Okay, listen to this. Oscar Isaac, Poe Dameron himself, right? Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, Zendaya, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, and there's one other big one that I'm missing. Jason Momoa, Aquaman, and is going to be in there. So this is a star-studded cast, to say the least. It's Denis Villeneuve, so Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, Arrival. Guy hasn't made a bad movie, and it's coming out. It seems to be on track. We'll see what happens with COVID and movie theaters. That's a whole different conversation. But it's scheduled for a December 2020 release. And how I've heard this described to me is kind of Game of Thrones in space. A lot of stuff about royal families and leadership on a galactic scale. And I'm really excited for this, Jerry, because with Star Wars kind of at a stopping point with the Skywalker saga, with Avengers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of peaking with Endgame, I know they have a whole lot more to offer. Could this be the next It property in Hollywood adapted from a book series, kind of like Game of Thrones, but instead of the small screen, we're on the big screen here? Because this actor, this director, this release date, like the reverence they seem to be approaching this with, is either going to be one of the most big budget flops we've had since John Carter from Mars, or it's going to be something that's pretty damn good. Does this pique your interest at all?
It definitely does. I like it's not the greatest, but I do own, and I like the David Lynch version that has Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides. I think I'm saying it right.
I think that's right.
But yeah, I like it. I am interested. I agree with you. It's either gonna do really, really, really well and like possibly launch something, because there are a lot of sequels.
I think there's 6 books and then some maybe some of those are prequels. I was reading kind of Wikipedia reading it today. So
Frank Herbert wrote, I think, 6 books total, but I think other people or his son have, and his son like continued writing more books.
So his son found some like lost notes that was finishing the overall story of Dune, and he came back and finished the last 2 books in the series.
Okay.
At least that's what I read today. I could be completely off base.
That sounds fairly accurate from, I'm not a Dune expert. Like I said, I've seen the one. They really were hoping in the 80s that Dune was going to be a really big deal in terms of as a movie. There was a lot of hopes that Dune was going to be, again, kind of take over where, Return of the Jedi, 1983, that Dune was going to be kind of the next big sci-fi epic. And I don't think it did all that well. I think at the time it has its own language, its own culture. I mean, it's very unique. And I think at the time folks just weren't, that ready for that. But now look at Game of Thrones and, some of these other series that people have really invested in. So it might be the right time for it.
It is, from all I hear, while it is super entertaining and it's kind of held up in reverence among science fiction fans, called Lord of the Rings in space. I mentioned Game of Thrones in space. It is very dense, and it builds a galaxy much like Star Wars did, but without the history of Star Wars as far as mainstream popularity. It's popular within geek culture and science fiction, but here's 2 geeks right here. And with me, again, it's not a surprise, but can I ask you, why have you never tried to read Dune? Any reason in particular, or you just never got to it?
There is no reason. I honestly, I do have a copy. I picked up a copy somewhere, and I just have never got around to it.
So I guess to kind of get things hyped up for the movie, they went back and they re-released the book, and I think maybe this past fall. It's got this beautiful artwork in it. It's got like a reference dictionary in the back as far as species and languages and things of that nature. And it's $29 on Amazon. But if you really want to dive into Dune, that may be worth checking out between now and when the movie comes out. Now, I think the book's long. It's like over 600. I think it's 688 pages I saw. But it's not like
it's very lengthy.
It's not like it we're talking about here, The Stand, but it is, it's not something you're going to breeze right through, just because I heard that if you take the time to invest in this galaxy or this universe, that it really rewards you and pays off. It pays off. So, and this isn't Disney. Here is a potential tentpole franchise that isn't under the Disney umbrella. So to me, that just fascinates me. Like, what will be the next it thing? Game of Thrones, Harry Potter. I think the best days of that stuff, Lord of the Rings, obviously the DC movies, the MCU movies, Star Wars. I don't want to say the best days of all those properties are behind us, but maybe cinematically you could make that argument. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see what Dune is.
Hopefully, we somewhere get to the point where everybody is nuts about Masters of the Universe.
Yes, that's going to be... I would say that could be in the darkest timeline, to quote Community, but we're living in the darkest timeline, to quote Community, so that's definitely not the case. So from a potential galaxy to a galaxy far, far away, Jerry, can we get into our main topic of ranking our favorite live-action Star Wars films?
Let's do it.
Let's get into that topic right now.
You will be a Jedi. I promise. This is a dangerous time for you. tempted by the dark side of the Force.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
Never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
Wokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
You were the chosen one! I love you.
I know.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Someday I will be the most powerful Jedi ever.
Okay, Jerry, so we're going to rank these 11 through 1. We'll alternate. I'll let you start with your number 11 first. We're not including any of the TV shows, any of the animated features like the animated Clone Wars or animated Ewok stuff. The holiday specials not included here. So we're going to discuss why we have ranked them this way, 11 to 1. And then I got...
Ewoks movies for live action. Just throwing it out.
And then we're going to kind of do some rapid-fire favorite Star Wars things to wrap it up. So, Jerry, let's go ahead and start with your... This is something I've always wanted to do on a podcast. So you talked about comfort food.
We've ever really done this before.
And this could...
I gotta say, this was a little bit of a challenge. There was a lot of this where I knew exactly where it was going to go. But the middle movies were harder for me because I never really thought of some of the movies. Like I knew my top parts, and I knew my bottom parts. But the middle's where it got a little tough for me.
It's good to know your top from your bottom parts, Jerry. I'm glad you do. What is your number 11 favorite Star Wars film?
My number 11, if you've ever heard me talk, this is not a surprise. My number 11 is The Last Jedi.
I'm not surprised.
I just don't think it's fun. Again, I think a lot of things people didn't like about the movie, I wasn't as bothered by. But as I've watched it a few times, since it's come out, it's just not a real fun, entertaining movie. I don't sit there and think like, I should put The Last Jedi on. It's just it kind of is what it is. Other than Crate, that's the most interesting, kind of world to me, and it's still very barren. It's got the cool crystal foxes though.
Those are cool.
What they're called, Vulpes? I don't know. So,
and those are at Galaxy's Edge, too, so that's something to look forward to.
Crystal Foxes are at Galaxy's Edge?
Yes, they are, like in some of the shops and stuff in the back.
Oh, okay, like Doc Ondars and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, I've read all the Galaxy's Edge books. I'm, like, rearing the go. But...
Me too. It's going to be a while. I think that, so I just turned 33. That's like my 40th birthday goal is to go to Galaxy's Edge. So I really want to go when the kids are older. And I know y'all, Allie's about at that age, but I know you were kind of waiting on that as well. But we could talk.
We were talking about because we're going to visit we visited my wife's parents in Florida, and my brother-in-law was like, we're not far from Disney World. Maybe we could go. And everybody's like, yeah. And I think, like, mother-in-law was like, we're not going to go this time. We'll try it for the spring. So, it's all right. Okay.
I would say that's bad luck, but in my experience, there's no such thing as luck. So, Jerry, that's your number 11. So my number 11 is I think it's probably going to be pretty par for the course if you talk to a lot of Star Wars fans. And I do want to make one thing clear. As Star Wars fans, there are things we love in all these movies. Even Jerry doesn't like The Last Jedi that much. He, like you mentioned, he really liked Crate, and there's always those things to dig into in these movies as a true Star Wars fan, which is probably, I know it goes back and forth between this, Batman, and Marvel, but if I had to pick one it would be probably this or the MCU as far as what I would dive into the rest of my life, but that's a different conversation. My number 11 is The Phantom Menace. When this movie came out, I was in 6th grade. I'm a few years younger than Jerry, not too much. I was psyched for it. I liked it as a kid. There are parts of this movie that I absolutely love. The pod racing scene as a kid, I loved. It goes on a little too long, I would say.
It is pretty long.
The stuff that really... You mentioned boring with The Last Jedi. To me, when I go back and watch aside from the Obi-Wan, Maul, and Qui-Gon fight, everything else on Naboo just feels boring to me. The stuff on Tatooine I thoroughly enjoy. The stuff at the beginning of the movie with the Nemoidans and the Trade Federation and the Viceroy and all that, I genuinely enjoy. But the Naboo stuff, even at the end, besides the lightsaber fight, just drags. Yeah. But I love Duel of the Fates, man. That is something that is up there with some of the most iconic pieces of music that the legendary John Williams has done. But there's just something about this movie that I don't want to watch it for whatever reason. It's one of the few Star Wars movies that when I get to it, if I'm doing a rewatch or I'm going through this Skywalker Saga box set, that I'm always so hesitant to put in. So my number 11's the 1999's A Phantom Menace.
So I'm gonna tell you real quick. Episode 1 is probably the movie on my list that has changed in position the most over time.
Yes, and it's easy to hate on Jar Jar Binks. He's usually the go-to of why people hate this movie. And Jar Jar, he is what he is. I get that he is annoying and kind of over the top. I think George did a good job reining him in as the sequel trilogy progressed. Over time, I've grown to not hate Jar Jar Binks. I don't like him, but he's not the reason that I don't want to watch Episode 1, despite what many people would think. And so here's the thing,
it's on my list. It's coming up.
So it's on. I don't want to spoil our list for each other. So I have Last Jedi later on in the list. So I wanted Jerry to kind of say his piece on The Last Jedi, and I'll say my piece there, kind of like with The Phantom Menace right now. So we don't want to kind of step over each other's points. Okay, Jerry, what is your number 10?
Okay, my number 10 is the film we talked about last week, and it's The Rise of Skywalker. Number 10 on my list. I will say again, this is one that could shift a little bit because I've only watched the movie one time. Haven't seen it again yet. Haven't been able to track down a copy yet. But I did like it. I mean, last week, somebody, was it Kendall, who was talking about our thing and said he didn't want to hear another podcast just like trash the movie.
And I hope we didn't do that. I don't think we did. I hope we did.
I don't hate The Rise of Skywalker. I don't like the lack of any kind of planning it feels like Disney put into the sequel trilogy.
I think that's the biggest indictment on that is the reactionary nature of it.
Something I had to talk about The Rise of Skywalker. But The Rise of Skywalker, and I compared it to Attack of the Clones, it's a movie that has a lot of flaws, but it has a lot of really fun parts too, kind of a lot of, pops for the audience and stuff. You have characters like, when Lando shows back up, when Wedge shows back up, you have those kind of things. When Han shows back up. And I do enjoy the movie. I would say after... I don't actively hate The Last Jedi. I really can't wrap my mind around the movie that much and enjoying it all the time, but there are parts of it I really like. But after that one, all of these movies I really like. It's just the degree of liking it. And so number 10 for me is the Rise of Skywalker.
So of all the movies of the 11, there's only 2 movies that if you say, hey, I want to put this in right now and let's watch it, that I would be like, I don't know if I do. One's The Phantom Menace, and I'll mention the other one coming up with my number 10, and I actually do like this movie. I think it's like a great film, but this isn't what we think necessarily. I tried to combine what was the best and what was the favorite. I tried to be even kill with that, but this is our list. You know, they change. They fluctuate over time. A list is just a frozen point of time of your opinion. They're fun to do. I don't know how definitive.
That's deep, Brad.
Yeah, I don't know how definitive they are, but they're really fun to do. So my number 10 is Rogue One. And I know this is going to be a surprise because this is most people's favorite Disney Star Wars movie, I think. And I think that's going to be Jerry here. I don't like Felicity. I like Felicity Jones as Jyn Erso. Is it Felicity Jones? Is that right? Yeah, that's the actress's name. I like Felicity Jones as Jyn Erso. I don't love her as that character. There are things I do love about this movie. I love K2SO. I love everything with Vader. I love director Krennic. But I love the concept of Jedha. I love the wheels. What's it called, Jerry? Help me out here.
Guardians of the Wheels.
The Guardians of the Wheels, Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe. I like those characters a lot. It gets messy for me when they go to again, spoilers for all these movies. You've probably seen all these a dozen times if you're listening to this podcast to this point. And we do have listeners again, so thank you. But when they go to assassinate Jyn Erso's father, Galen Erso, to me the movie just gets a little sloppy there. And it loses me a little bit. I don't think it picks back up in that third act. But I think if you ask most people what their favorite part of the Rogue One was, it's that Darth Vader scene. I could have easily I would rather look that up on YouTube, which is not something I usually like to do. I'd rather just sit down and have a cinematic experience. I would rather just look that up on YouTube and then move on with my day than revisit this. That being
not my favorite part of this movie.
That being said, though, I went back and I rewatched this right before I went and saw Rise of Skywalker on Disney Plus, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So this is not one that I dislike per se. It's just not going to be one of my favorites. So that's my number 10. I know that's surprising. Jerry, so we're on to number 9, right? We're on to your number 9?
We're on to number 9.
Okay, what is your number 9?
My number 9 is Solo. Solo, A Star Wars Story. I really liked Solo. I thought Solo was really fun. I think one of the biggest crimes that's happened in the last few years in terms of films being, kind of flopping or whatnot, was Solo was a perfectly fun, really enjoyable movie, and I absolutely enjoyed it. And it was a shame that it didn't do better, because I thought everybody in that movie was great.
Alden Ehrenreich was fantastic. Alden Ehrenreich.
I thought he was very. I mean, again, how intimidating to say, "Hey, listen, you're going to play Harrison Ford." I mean, that's pretty. Feel like someone, listen, you're going to play Tom Hanks. I mean, that's pretty tough right there. That's some hard stuff to fill. But the only reason that Solo is so low on my list,
Solo is so low on your list,
yeah, is I unfortunately feel that Solo is a very inconsequential Star Wars movie. I just don't feel like it influences,
there's
everything.
There's comfort in that. It feels like an old EU novel in that way, and not a consequential one.
It does. I really wish that, whether it would be Disney Plus or, I know there is a Han Solo Imperial Cadet comic. It was pretty good. And there was a tie-in novel as well. But I really wish that we would see more of this explored, but I have my fears that at this point, that Disney is just gonna not let anybody touch anything to do with Solo.
They came out and said that about a week ago, so you are right.
Yeah, it's just gonna be. It is what it is, unfortunately.
Okay, so that is your number 9 is Solo. My number 9 is Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Now, I will tell you, everything from 9 to 1 here are movies that I would revisit in a second, that I do not find boring, and that for various different reasons, I love revisiting time and time again. The top 2 for very obvious reasons. But you mentioned this last week, Jerry. Attack of the Clones is not a boring movie. There are things to dislike about it. Some of the writing between Padme and Anakin. Hayden Christensen's nowhere near the actor he will become in Episode 3, where I think he's a fairly adequate Anakin.
I agree.
But as the movie goes on, he gets better and better to me. When I think of this movie, I think of action set pieces. I think of the Sam Wessel chase scene, the bounty hunter chase scene to open up the movie. Yeah. I remember sitting there in high school. I know you were a senior when that came out, so I think I just
graduated. Yeah.
Okay, so I was getting ready to go into my sophomore year. I guess I just finished freshman year. Came out in 2002, right? Was that when Attack of the Clones came?
2002, yeah.
So I think of that. I think of all the stuff with Jango Fett and Obi-Wan. I love that. I think of Dex's Diner. How that feels like the cantina in a very different way. Whereas something in The Last Jedi, when they go to Canto Bight doesn't. I think of getting to see Yoda use a lightsaber. I know people like to kind of crap on that now, but when I was in the theater as a rising 10th grader and I saw Yoda pull that lightsaber out to fight Dooku, everybody in that theater was cheering. Now, I went on an opening weekend. You probably went on midnight.
I
but
was at a midnight release at we had a big mall called Opry Mills, and I went to so many midnight movie releases there.
That's how
pictures.
That's how I want.
People.
You need to send me those. We should put them in the post for this podcast. How about this is one of it may be the only time. I know we see it here and there in Revenge of the Sith, but I will say it's one of the only times we get to see a large group of Jedi fight a large enemy group, kind of going into the Battle of Geonosis. But really what I'm talking about is that arena scene. Dude,
my gosh, yeah.
That is epic. Like, that's not an epic movie.
You got the Nexu, you got the Acklay, you got battle droids, you got Geonosians.
They're so good.
Dooku, Jango.
You get to see Mace Windu, Samuel freaking L. Jackson, which
the party's over. I mean, who does?
God, it's freaking awesome. That decapitation, man. Is that the only? So I know Dooku gets decapitated. So that's the only 2 decapitations that I remember in Star Wars. I could be wrong. I'm trying to think of anymore. But but like human decapitations. I just ordered Harper. Her birthday's coming up. She's got 2 of these lightsabers that she loves they don't light up and make sound. She's got the Jedi Luke, Return of the Jedi, the green one, and the Vader one, and she loves to get my Darth Vader helmet, and she loves Star Wars. She is her father's daughter, that's for sure. But I got her the Mace Windu one that actually makes sounds and the humming noise, so I'm excited. But man, it's just a hell of a fun movie when you take away the cringe-worthy stuff. I mean, say what you want to about Anakin's speech. I hate all of them about the Tusken Raiders, but when he goes and
I think that part's incredible.
But when he goes and murders them and Duel of the Fates is playing as he goes out on the speeder, that's pretty damn good, man. So that's
stuff we needed to see.
It is. Now, when they go to that droid factory or whatever, that's like cringeworthy. And that's what kind of, I think, taints this movie, is it's filled with so many spectacle moments, but there's just cringe stuff where Anakin gets his hand caught in the thing. You know what I'm talking about.
I wonder if some of that wasn't a reaction to like folks saying, "Gosh, Episode 1 had a lot of talk," you know. So
it does go back to Star Wars being reactionary. So that's my number 9, Jerry. I think you okay there, Jerry?
Yeah, I said blow my nose. Sorry.
I think we're to number 8. You're number 8.
Well, my number 8, Brad, is Attack of the Clones.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're pretty close on that one. You kind of said everything I could want to say about Attack of the Clones. Attack of the Clones has so much good stuff in it, and it obviously could have been it honestly could have been a little bit higher on my list, but there definitely are some real weaknesses in this movie. There are some real weaknesses in this film, and it just goes back to that some of the dialogue in that movie is just awful.
Yes.
There are some actors that are really good in some movies and really bad in others, and it's got to be a direction issue. Now, again, there are some actors that in the prequels, I don't care what the line is, Ewan McGregor makes it sound good.
Yes, he
fantastic. Makes it sound good. He's perfect in these movies. Liam Neeson was perfect in these movies. Whatever the line was, didn't matter how absurd, he made it sound good. Christopher Lee, didn't matter what it was, the dude makes it sound good. Unfortunately, Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman did not make all these lines sound good. Natalie Portman does a really good job with these characters. I love Padme, but in this movie, when we get into some of those, the love story between her and Anakin, I mean, Natalie Portman is an incredible actress.
I mean, Academy, I don't know if she's won an Oscar, but she's been nominated several times. I think she may have won for Black Swan.
I don't know. But you can tell that obviously this is some of that. She was not, maybe not getting the direction or whatever, because golly, the scenes with her and Hayden Christensen are sometimes very cringeworthy. But there's so much good stuff in this movie. I mean, the fight scenes are incredible. The characters are interesting. The planets are interesting and really varied. And I love the Coruscant chase. I mean, it's such a treat to be able to see so much of Coruscant, see all this stuff happening, to see more of the Jedi Temple, to see like the kids, the younglings learning and, being trained. So I put it as a number 8. I do put this movie on quite a bit, when I'm really just looking for something just to kind of enjoy and zone out to.
So we're really close on these, because my number 8 is going to be Solo. Solo, a Star Wars story. So I really enjoy Solo. I think it's a great movie. I think Alden Ehrenreich captures the spirit of Harrison Ford's Han Solo without trying to completely imitate Harrison Ford. Like I can tell.
It doesn't come off as an impression.
No, I don't think it ever does.
It feels true to the character.
And how about Donald Glover here as Lando? Billy D's a tough act to follow as well. I mean, I get the whole Harrison Ford, but now at some points it kind of does seem like he's doing more of an impression, but by God, he's nailing that impression.
He has an unusual amount of charisma and charm, which is kind of what you have to, I think, to play Billy D. Williams, and it works. It comes off perfectly. And some of the little things that they came up with, like, having him call Han.
Yeah.
Was just really clever, because that's kind of one of those. They do say Lando does say Han instead of Han. It's kind of one of those weird little things, and to capture it in that movie was very clever.
I know a lot of people don't like the fact that his robot, voiced by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, was uploaded kind of as a consciousness to the Millennium Falcon. But kind of how I like, in some ways, to see the Millennium Falcon as a character myself. Yeah. I like that. I didn't hate it. That action set piece with the gravity train, where it's inverting and all the stuff with Infant's Nest and Chewbacca. I got the Gentle Giant Chewbacca statue from Solo back here, where he's got the goggles on. I love that. They really do build the dynamics between Han, Chewie, and Lando, I think, the best they possibly could, considering they didn't have any of those originals, including Peter Mayhew in this one, to kind of bridge the gap between old and new. I like Woody Harrelson in this movie. I absolutely love, you can call it fan service, and it probably is, the line where Woody Harrelson's like, I forgot to teach you the most important lesson, and then Han shoots first.
I know.
I mean, come on, dude. That was freaking awesome.
This movie also has some of the best background character design. The background aliens and things in there are incredible in Solo.
How about the mud troopers and getting to see that type of warfare? Now, there are some dumb parts where he gets named by the Imperial officer or whatever, as he doesn't have a last name.
That is a really strange scene, and I'm not sure why that was. Yeah, I don't understand that part. It doesn't make. Why is it just not his name? You know.
But I thoroughly enjoy Solo, and I can't wait. I want to. I've been itching to kind of revisit that. So, Jerry, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is The Force Awakens.
Why is it your number 7, Jerry?
I do like The Force Awakens. You know, the other 2 sequel movies were 11 and 10 on my list, but I think The Force Awakens on its own is really good. I think the problems with, you know, I know that there are problems I've talked about where these movies for the sequel trilogy don't necessarily feel like they're connected to a galaxy. They just kind of seem like they're happening. But The Force Awakens could have got away with that. Just kind of like the original Star Wars. It's just, you know, I think it's exciting. I think it really does capture a lot of the charm of the original trilogy. I think it captures a lot of the charm. It captures a lot of that kind of, you know, very, everything feels new, you know, and I know that there's a lot of people who say it's just a remake of episode 1, or excuse me, of
a remake
of A New Hope, of the original movie. It's not a remake of episode 1. But
can you imagine if J.J. Abrams would have done that?
That would have been that would have been interesting.
A Gungan's the first shot. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I think The Force Awakens did exactly what it needed to do. It really got people excited about Star Wars again. It got older fans excited about Star Wars. I think kids really responded well to The Force Awakens. I mean, it was a very fun, you know, fast-moving movie with a lot of exciting set pieces, good characters, and then, unfortunately, things kind of went downhill from there. But when I walked out of The Force Awakens, I'm not sure that I've ever been as excited for a movie as I was for the sequel to The Force Awakens. I mean, looking back on it, are there problems now with the fact that they never got everybody together? Yes, there are. But at the time, The Force Awakens was exactly like the Star Wars movie we needed. And it was very, very exciting. And I think it's still a really fun, fast-paced movie that kind of captures that snappy, witty dialogue of the original trilogy. You know, kind of like everybody's always moving really quickly and sarcastic. And it's entertaining. I love it. I really like The Force Awakens.
I'm going to ditto that as far as I've never been more excited for Star Wars in my life, other than maybe, you know, leading up to The Phantom Menace, but probably even I was so young, not so young, but I was younger then. The Force Awakens, coming out of that, man, I'd never been that excited about Star Wars. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. My number 7 is Revenge of the Sith. I did go to the midnight showing. This was my senior year of high school Star Wars movie. I remember finishing exams and going to the midnight showing. Man, the opening scene here when they go in to have the battle with Dooku, I think it's one of the best opening scenes of all of Star Wars. And you get to see R2 just do some crazy stuff. And it's just little.
Lord, our speciality.
I love just the little touches in Revenge of the Sith. I think it's the best of all the prequel movies. If I had to rewatch one, it would be Attack of the Clones, because Revenge of the Sith to me is just so heavy, and it's not one that I'm always intent on revisiting, despite the fact that I think it's a really good movie. But what has made me love Revenge of the Sith more and more over the years, and I know this is still kind of extra homework, but it's what Star Wars fans love to do, is the Clone Wars. That we see, and we've talked about this on here, that we see that Anakin and Obi-Wan relationship build up, and it makes that lightsaber battle at the end all that more tragic. I mean, I think that probably is the best lightsaber battle in all of Star Wars. I like it better than the Maul lightsaber fight. I like the one in the snow and the Force Awakens a lot. But you can argue that maybe this one goes on a little too long. But man, Ewan McGregor's firing on all cylinders. You were the chosen one. All that. You were like a brother to me. I mean, you feel...
Like, I hate you. Oh my gosh.
It's gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
Even more so after you see... I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Even more so after you see the Clone Wars. Man, the Sidious Mace Windu scene, it's dark, but I like it. The lightsaber fight between Yoda and Palpatine and the Galactic Senate, I really like that. It's a little bit over the top, but Revenge of the Sith, dark, but I thoroughly enjoy it. So we're to the top half of this list, Jerry. What's your number 6?
My number 6 is Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
A far jump.
This is the movie that has gone up on my list the most over the years. When this movie, you said earlier, didn't know if you were more excited for Episode 8 after watching Episode 7 with that cliffhanger ending with Luke and Rey, or for Phantom Menace. I mean, Phantom Menace came out. I was in 9th grade. I was so freaking excited for this movie. I mean, this was a big deal. I mean, it really is trying to explain. I mean, everywhere you went. I mean, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken had promotions for this movie. I remember collecting the Pepsi cans. I was actually doing some cleaning in my hobby room today, and I found my Anakin Skywalker Pod Racer soap dish. I mean, this movie was crazy huge. And I remember seeing it and still being really excited about it, but there were definitely some parts of this movie at the time that sat really awkward with me. It was different. It's very different than the original trilogy. It's incredibly different than the original trilogy. And over time, I started to dislike the movie. And then probably back in maybe 2009, 2010, I started, really getting back into reading a lot of the Star Wars books and stuff like that. And I sat down and I made a list of 100 things I like about this movie.
I've heard this story, but it's a good one.
Yeah. And I think that actually may have come out, that I may have written that about the time the movie came out in theaters. So that might have been 2011 or 12. When did the 3D release come out?
I think it was 11.
Okay. As I sat there and watched this movie again, and I thought, this movie does more world building for Star Wars than probably any other film in the series other than A New Hope. This movie does incredible amounts of world building. There is so much about Star Wars that everybody talks about now that comes from this movie. As I've watched it over and over, I really like Episode 1. It's silly at times. Yeah, the pod race goes on a little too long, but I think it's actually a really good movie if you just, I don't know, I had to kind of change my mindset a little bit about it, but I never find it dull. I always enjoy watching it, and it has some of my favorite moments in the whole Star Wars saga in this movie.
When that door opens up and Darth Maul's standing there and the Duel of the Fates hits, great moment.
This is I think it is one of the most visually appealing films to watch. I mean, it is so interesting to look at all of the, the different, how different Naboo is from Tatooine, how different Tatooine is from Coruscant, just all of the little details. I understand. I mean, I understand why Episode 1 has got the reputation it's got. I think most people over time have kind of come around to it. Some people haven't, and it's okay. But for me, this movie jumped up on my list pretty high, and it's now my number 6.
And I like Darth Maul, but at the time he was like a cool T-shirt and kind of blister card backdrop on action figures. But the Clone Wars, again, I hate to keep going to that well, and Rebels as well, have made that character such a better character. So to know that you're getting that introduction of him there where you think it's going to be his demise, I think does make the Phantom Menace a little bit more of a rewarding experience. So a Phantom Menace that was your number 6. So
that's my number 6.
My number 6 is The Last Jedi. Not The Last Jedi, I'm sorry. Rise of Skywalker, Jerry. I know you got excited there. My number 6 is The Rise of Skywalker. We did a whole podcast on it last week. I felt it's too reactionary. The Palpatine stuff and I like Palpatine, man. Like I at first I really liked it, but the more and more I think about it and the more and more I revisit it, the less I like it. I felt that it was way too reactionary to The Last Jedi, although JJ was kind of dealt a tough hand there. But you're getting paid that much money and you're that talented of a filmmaker, I think you could have figured out something a little better. And a part of that was Carrie Fisher. I get it. Delay the movie and figure out some. If we could have waited till 2021 to get this movie and it had been a masterpiece conclusion to the Skywalker saga, I think all Star Wars fans would have taken that. But, of course, that's not what we got. The Palpatine stuff, the more and more I think about it, I just don't love it. I don't hate it. I do not hate it. But I just don't like it. If we didn't do a podcast on it last week, I would dive much more deeper into that.
Sure.
So, Jerry, we're to our top 5 here. What is your number 5?
My number 5 is Rogue One. Rogue One is definitely my favorite of the films that have come out during the Disney years of Star Wars. And you had Rogue One pretty low. I have Rogue One fairly high. And the thing with Rogue One, I will admit, I'm not always in the mood to watch Rogue One because it's kind of a bummer at times.
Kind of like Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, but I also think Rogue One is, absolutely one of the best Star Wars stories, ever told. It has some of the best character design. I mean, you look at some of the troopers in that movie. You look at some of the, the costumes. You look at some of the characters. The background creatures.
Death Troopers, Jedha, Jerry. Death Troopers. That's all I gotta say.
Jedha is an incredible. I mean, that is an incredible planet. The design, the culture, the history, of stuff when you read about it and look at some of the details. And when I was watching Rogue One, I remember being struck by the scene when they're walking through the streets of Jeddah and that fight. There's a the firefight starts, and the tanks carrying the kyber crystals are rolling through, and that ATST comes around the corner fighting in that urban combat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is stuff you've kind of always just imagined and thought about, and here it is right on the screen. I mean, usually Star Wars is a pretty, is despite some of the things happening, and there's a lot of sacrifice in Star Wars, but a lot of time it's pretty happy-go-lucky. The good guys win, the bad guys lose, and Rogue One definitely adds a lot of shades of gray to that. I mean, it's pretty dramatic. I think it's pretty gutsy that they made a movie where the heroes die. And, spoiler, that happens. But, I mean, that's a pretty gutsy move.
And it's a perfect lead in to one of the most iconic film moments of ever, the beginning of A New Hope, and it's just seamless.
It feels so perfect. I mean, it really, to me, it's the movie from the sequel trilogy, well, it's not sequel trilogy, it's the movie from the Disney tenure that is so well thought out. I mean, it's clear that everything about this movie was really done with a love and reverence for A New Hope. And you've been saying about how the Clone Wars retroactively makes Revenge of the Sith better. I think this movie even makes A New Hope better.
It does, because you know about the stolen Death Star plans. I know they had dabbled in the EU, but that makes it, because I went back and rewatched A New Hope about 3 or 4 days ago on that 4K box set, and having recently watched Rogue One, there is a lot more weight to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, gosh, bringing back Bail Organa and
that's a good moment.
Mon Mothma. I mean, the part when Chopper goes rolling through, when you have the ghost. I mean, that is incredible. So
that was that was your number 5.
Rogue One is my number 5. We are in the top 5.
We're in the top 5. So my number 5 is The Force Awakens. One of the things that Jerry hit on is he's maybe never been that excited about Star Wars other than leading into The Phantom Menace. I think that point is worth reiterating here. I was so excited walking out of that theater. That being said, there's so much I love here. The introduction of the new characters, the new cast, the great mystery boxes that opens up that Rian Johnson later kind of closes, but who is Snoke? Who is Lord Santeca? That whole introduction to Kylo Ren there and how there's a history, I just absolutely love that introduction. How you see the First Order coming in, this is where Finn he goes AWOL here, but how the First Order is much more ruthless than maybe the Empire was ever shown as on screen. They're bringing in the Flame Troopers.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. But what really makes me enjoy this film, the scene that will stick with me from the sequel trilogy is the death of Han Solo and the lightsaber fight that takes place on Starkiller Base later at the climax of that film. But that moment between Ben Solo and Harrison Ford, where you have those two great actors like they did kind of in episode 9 that we just talked about last week, really showing their chops. And here's what I really love about that moment, Jerry. There's a moment where Chewie has a shot to take Kylo, and he doesn't take it. And you can just feel the anxiety in his breath. And that was just great filmmaking by JJ. And I know Peter wasn't in the suit there. It was the newer Chewbacca actor, because Peter was really sick.
I can't remember his name, but he did a good job in Solo. He did a good job.
He's done a good job as Chewbacca. Those are
Solo, he did a great job.
Those are big shoes to fill, literally and figuratively. But that moment, my jaw dropped. I'm so glad I didn't have it spoiled. I thought that Harrison Ford could go out like that. That being said, that moment really lived up to anything I could have envisioned in my mind. I think Kylo Ren is an awesome character. I didn't like him coming out of The Last Jedi, but as I've seen his arc wrap up, is it the most well-handled thing in all of Star Wars? Absolutely not. But Adam Driver, I think, elevates that character so much with his performances across all 3 of these films. But by God, that lightsaber fight where he's wounded by Rey and he's like thumping his chest to get the momentum to get up and fight her, I just thought that was epic to me, man. So
you definitely say with the prequel trilogy, there is the sequel trilogy, there's no weak acting in those movies. That was the thing that they really cast very good actors, and I think everybody gave incredible performances.
Okay, Jerry, we're to number 4. What's your number 4 favorite Star Wars film?
My number 4 is Revenge of the Sith. So you've talked about Revenge of the Sith a little bit. Revenge of the Sith, I mean, is that this came out. I was joking with my wife that I only had to wait for our wedding for 2 days because we got married on May 21st, 2005, and Revenge of the Sith came out May 19th, 2005. So, I wasn't waiting for our wedding for, almost a year. I was waiting for Revenge of the Sith, and then I only had to wait 2 days. We saw Revenge of the Sith at a midnight showing. Like I said, just a couple days before our wedding, and I mean that was it was very emotional.
Also, we thought that was going to be the last Star Wars movie.
We thought it was going to be the last Star Wars movie. It was kind of like this. Yeah, this was the last Star Wars film, and I was kind of ending this, this stage of my life, and getting ready to let my Anakin Skywalker die as I became Darth Vader. No, I'm just kidding. It's a terrible reference. Anyways, I think Revenge of the Sith was a very well handled movie. It's very tight. It doesn't stray a whole lot from what it needs to tell. And I think this, what story it needs to tell, it does have some very good set pieces in it. I do like, I like General Grievous. I like the scene you talked about earlier, the whole opening. I mean, the opening is pretty exciting, but
you really get to see Anakin be that great pilot you always hear about.
Yeah, you get to see that, and fortunately, like I said, Clone Wars really shows you that friendship and makes this even more heartbreaking and tragic and lays the seeds for this to happen. But Hayden Christensen pulls it out. I think he does a fantastic job in this movie, and really is a very, very believable, very tortured, very very intense. And that fight scene, the lightsaber battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan is one of my 3 favorites in the whole trilogy. My gosh.
The whole saga.
The whole saga is one of my 3 favorites in the whole saga.
Okay, so my number 4 is formerly a revenge movie. It was Revenge of the Jedi, but is now Return of the Jedi, is what it ends up being called, 1983. Well before my time. But this movie, I think, really jumps from set piece to set piece better than some of the other Star Wars movies. You go from Jabba's palace, I love all that, to Endor. You know what my favorite moment of this movie is, and a lot of it is the little stuff. My favorite moment of this movie, whether it was when I was a kid or revisiting as an adult, is the scene in the elevator when Luke Skywalker turns himself into Vader. And
yes,
it's just a little moment where Vader ignites the lightsaber, and he kind of gives the tip of the hat to his son for constructing that green lightsaber. And it's really a father-son moment. When you, unlike any of the other ones in Star Wars, I don't know. I love little stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting movie.
It really is. The speeder bike chase is just freaking awesome through the woods with the scout trooper. I love that. I don't hate the Ewoks like some people do. The lightsaber in front of the Emperor, that climax when you're jumping back and forth between the lightsaber and the Battle of the Second Death Star and the Battle of Endor on the ground there, I thought that's some great cross-cutting. But man, when Vader picks up the Emperor and throws him over, it's just, it gives you all the feels, man. So yeah, that's my number 4 is Return of the Jedi. What's your number 4, Jerry? Or sorry, we're into number 3. You wanted to say something? Sorry.
My number 3 is Return of the Jedi.
So pick this up.
As a kid, I could say when I was younger, Return of the Jedi would have been my favorite. Was my favorite movie for a long time. So as I've gotten older, that's changed a little bit. But when we're at this part, I'm really just gushing over, any of these movies at this point. Return of the Jedi does, and I'm not going to say it's disjointed, but it is very interesting that the first half of this movie is really just about rescuing Han Solo. That's the first half of this movie. The whole Jabba the Hutt part is really rescuing Han Solo. It's rectifying, the problem that arises from the end of The Empire Strikes Back. And that all takes place before you really get into the main plot of this film. It's very interesting, and I think if the movie had been made today, a lot of folks would probably complain about that. But going back on it, I love Jabba the Hutt. I love everything about those Jabba the Hutt scenes. Some of the most visually interesting. It's like the cantina on steroids. You've got, and I know that has. I will say it is interesting to talk about these movies, considering I've seen them changed multiple times at this point. You have the different music numbers, that were the music numbers that were added in for the special editions, that when I first saw these movies, those music numbers were not there. That's just interesting. I don't really have a massive opinion on that I want to go into right now. But I love Return of the Jedi. I mean, it is a perfect ending for that film. If there was never a movie beyond Return of the Jedi, time-wise, I would be okay with that. I'm glad there's not. I mean, I do enjoy seeing other things. But Return of the Jedi was a perfect ending for the original trilogy and for the original, saga of 6 films.
And Shadows of the Empire made Return of the Jedi better. I know that's not canon anymore, but I think it did. So just one man's opinion there. So Jerry, this is where it gets very interesting, because and maybe this is the biggest conversation of the podcast as far as where we rank these, because my number 3 is The Last Jedi. Can you believe it, Jerry?
I'm actually really I really was sitting there trying to figure out, like, I haven't heard him say that yet. So I'm really trying to to figure out what you like about the movie.
So we've done 2 podcasts on The Last Jedi. And I think on both podcasts, especially the second one, when you and I did a confirmed crap podcast on it, we didn't sit there and hate on the movie, but we were very critical of the movie at that point in time. And to me, this is the way you were talking about A Phantom Menace. I know we hadn't had as long with The Last Jedi, but I have revisited it multiple times since it hit home video and Disney Plus since it hit Blu-ray and Disney Plus and all that stuff. But kind of how The Phantom Menace has gotten better for you, The Last Jedi over multiple viewings has just gotten better and better and better each time. The only, I think, really, I know you can argue this and we could argue this, but that's not really the point of this list. Yeah. The only moment that sticks out to me like a sore thumb is when Leia kind of floats back in. I don't like that.
It's so awkward.
It is very off-putting.
It's really weird.
So I'm going to tell you some of the reasons why I love The Last Jedi, and you mentioned some of these. I think the Dreadnought scene at the beginning with Rose Tico's sister, where she drops those bombs on that what's she dropping on? Was it was it a Star Destroyer?
Yeah, it's like a Dreadnought class Star Destroyer, right?
Yeah. So when that's right. So when you have Rose Tico's sister, Paige Tico, when it's silent and she catches that trigger with the other hand and drops it on the giant Dreadnought Star Destroyer. That's one of the best action space battle scenes, I think, in all Star Wars. And I think that's a fantastic opening to that movie. I think it's undercut somewhat by the conversation between Poe Dameron and General Hux, which I do not love. I think that kind of undermines the Hux character. The Holdo maneuver was freaking epic. I don't like who did it. Would I have rather have been the Akbar maneuver or the Leia maneuver? The Organa maneuver? Sure, you're damn right I would. But that being said, it doesn't kind of undo the shock of that silent part of that movie in a packed theater. So I definitely love that. I love the Praetorian Guard sequence, the fight scene. When Snoke's killed in the first viewing, I'm like, oh my God, I've thought so much about Snoke. What the heck, blah, blah, blah. And that really just took me out of it. Up on multiple viewings, and especially after seeing the Rise of Skywalker, knowing Palpatine was behind Snoke, I really love that moment when he flips the lightsaber and he kills Snoke. Now, does that mean I was not disappointed the first time I saw it? I was, because I had Snoke, like so many others, hyped up in my head. But to me, what really makes this movie is the Battle of Crate. And I'm going to tell you why I love this movie so much and why I have it as my number 3 favorite Star Wars film of all time, at least at this point in 2020, is when Luke walks in to the Battle of Crate. I know he's not there. He's kind of force projecting. But when he walks in and has that conversation with Leia, and they talk about how no one's ever really gone. I think as far as the reuniting of the original cast, I know they were never all together, which is the original sin of the sequel trilogy, like we talked about last week. But that is the best moment of original cast members together in the sequel trilogy, is that moment that Leia and Luke share on Crate. And just when he walks out there and John Williams' score is swelling and you have that backdrop of Crate, I don't like all the stuff with Canto Bight. I think that's kind of pigeonholed, and Benicio del Toro and that stuff is, I don't think it's a mess. I just think it's a bit heavy-handed in the message that Rian Johnson is trying to send at that point in time. But that being said, I know that Rose gets a lot of hell from Star Wars fans. But I really like the line she gives to Finn where this is how we're going to win this war, is fighting for what we love, not against what we hate. And that was a very powerful political message at that point in time, and quite frankly, at this point in time in history. So I know that I've kind of changed my mind, but that's the great thing about this type of fandom. You're allowed to change your mind and evolve when you're thinking. It does subvert every expectation, and it really put J.J. Abrams in a tough spot. The first time I saw Broom Boy, I cringed. Each time I see Broom Boy with each subsequent viewing, I really like even though I don't like the execution, it kind of looks like a Hallmark commercial to me.
Yeah,
I do. It just doesn't fit with it.
It looks like it should be like at the end of a Christmas card commercial.
It does. It like from 1995 or something. It doesn't. It doesn't. The scene's not great, but to me, the messaging of the scene is great. That it reminds me. It's the same. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not comparing those two scenes in any way, what I'm about to say. But the message is trying to send is almost what I get from Luke looking at the twin sons. That this can be anybody. You don't have to be some chosen bloodline. Like, I do like that. Now, was I sad that Rey was a Palpatine? No, I wasn't sad that she was a Palpatine. But The Last Jedi, as part of that trilogy, I can see why it's hated. But if you can't do this because it's Star Wars, right? It's the saga. If you could look at this movie in a vacuum, I think it is a truly, truly expertly made film. And to me, it's technically great. Like how it's shot. That I hate when Luke throws the lightsaber over. Yeah, I didn't like that. So I've kind of let the fanboy in me kind of die down and kind of really try to embrace the message that Rian Johnson was trying to send and enjoy the moments there. But I guess we could do a third podcast on The Last Jedi. But that's my number 3, Jerry, and that's been heavily deliberated in my head ever since I made this list. Because I originally made this list after I saw Rise of Skywalker, but I just had never put it out there. So we're to number 2.
Number 2.
What's your number 2? These are not.
Number 2 is A New Hope.
That's my number 2 as well.
Yeah, I mean it's the original Star Wars film, and I mean if you're gonna start watching, any Star Wars movies, I mean, you really have to start with A New Hope, where I feel like it just doesn't make as much, nothing makes as much sense unless it's the Rosetta Stone of Star Wars.
It doesn't get much better in the trench run. Here's why I love A New Hope. One word here, friendship. And the reason I love A New Hope is it really kind of plays the theme of because to me Star Wars is about 2 things, friendship and family. I know it's set in a science fantasy galaxy far, far away, but when you get to the core elements, and there's a lot of themes for Star Wars, but friendship and family to me are the 2 most prevalent ones. I was going to ask you in a minute, what's your single favorite moment in any Star Wars movie? And I'm going to go ahead and say mine right here because it has it in this movie right here, A New Hope. When Han Solo shows up on the trench run, and he's like, woohoo, let's blow this thing and go home, kid. I almost cry every single time I see that scene. Because here was this guy, this scoundrel, who was this selfish, self-absorbed piece of crap, at least how he was portrayed in the movie, but he came through for his friends at the end. And to me, that's what Star Wars is all about. So, are we good to go to number 1, Jerry?
A New Hope is a movie that is I mean, you could honestly sort of pick any scene at random and understand why it was somebody's favorite scene. I mean, that's really true. You could pick about any scene in that movie and understand why it was someone's favorite. That movie is just filled with incredible imagery and imagination. I mean, I doubt there's any movie that's been more dissected than the original Star Wars. You know, people have looked at each individual part of it, and you know, it's been retold.
It's the most quotable, I think, too, especially everything Alec Guinness says in that movie.
Yeah, everything he said. He's definitely one of those actors that takes every, you know, whatever the dialogue, he takes it and makes it perfect.
Jerry actually married my wife Abby and I, and when he started the ceremony, he started out with "And Here We Go," the Joker, you know, with the podcast intro.
Oh.
But he also said, "You're getting ready to take your first step into a larger world." I mean, to me, that sums up that movie. I mean, can we go to Empire?
Let's go to Empire, because I mean, both of us have Empire Strikes Back as our number one. So
this is not just the best Star Wars movie; it is one of the best films, period, to ever be made. It's Lawrence Kasdan directing here. It's not Lucas, and I think that's important to point out. And I think Lawrence Kasdan did a lot on the script here, which shows. But
Lawrence Kasdan did the script and writing. Irving Kershner is the director.
I'm sorry. So, but Lucas did not direct. That was the point I was trying to get to.
He only directed. I mean, he directed the prequels, but he only directed A New Hope, because Richard Marquand directed Return of the Jedi, and Irving Kershner directed Empire Strikes Back.
So this and The Dark Knight go back and forth between being my two favorite movies, kind of how Indy and Ghostbusters do for you. It's the little moments in Empire that make it so good, and the big moments. Like, it's everything in here that is just so lovable. So, to me, Bespin is where that is the greatest crescendo in all of Star Wars. Just
I would agree with that.
The scenery that you have in Bespin. Is there anything quite like when Han opens that door and Vader stands up and said, "We'd be honored if you join us," and he pulls Han's blaster back and Boba Fett steps out? Does it get any better? Does it get any better, Jerry?
Everything about this movie, I don't really go down this rabbit hole, but I know there's a lot of folks that compare and contrast this movie with The Last Jedi, because they're kind of, I mean, there are some similarities. There are some similarities in the structure of those two movies. There's a lot of similarities in the structure, but to me, this movie, it does subvert expectations, but Empire does it in a way that lets the characters still be true. The characters still feel like the characters that they are. It doesn't feel like they're doing weird things, kind of make things feel different. But like Yoda, when you meet Yoda, he's such a different character, than you would first expect, I guess, the first time you would see it. It is a little bit harder because Empire is a movie that came out before I was born. Now, technically, Return of the Jedi came out before I was born too, I guess, because I think it came out in May of '83. I was born in September. So in some ways, a lot of these movies have always been around for me, but I really wasn't very familiar with Star Wars until I was probably in about sixth grade. And then that's when I got into Star Wars. Because you just didn't get into older stuff as easily,
you were super young. Yeah,
it was harder. I mean, you didn't have streaming and Disney Plus where you could go on and, watch all of these previous movies. I mean, before really the movies were re-released on VHS, unless you saw them on TV or clips of them in the Muppet Babies. Remember the Muppet Babies would always use Star Wars clips. I mean, that was kind of it. I had some records. I had like some book and records of Star Wars, but I don't know where that tangent was going. I sort of just.
I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say, "This is the Empire Strikes Back"? Remember The Dark Knight? This is the Empire Strikes Back of superhero movies. To me, that works in two ways. One, it's the best of the series, and number two, you also got to consider it leaves you on a cliffhanger to where it looks like the bad guys have won and the heroes are kind of lost, and you don't know what direction they will go. So this is one of the best movies of all time. Anything else you want to say about Empire before I give you a few rapid fires?
Empire Strikes Back is one of those movies that there's not a bad part to this movie.
No.
This movie starts off with a Tauntaun, Luke Skywalker and a Tauntaun getting attacked by a snow creature, and it just gets better from there. I mean, this movie is like insanely amazing, but this movie has an amazing set pieces. The Battle of Hoth, the lightsaber duel between Luke and Vader. But the small moments in this film are incredible. Like the conversations between, Luke and Yoda. And especially, let's be honest, Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher make this movie. I mean, their strained romance in this film is so... It's so believable. It's so interesting how it happened, and it just builds up through this movie to the end when Leia says "I love you" and Han says "I know." I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I'm not sitting here usually watching movies where I'm like, "Oh, it's so romantic," but Empire Strikes Back really has this mixture of action and these slow character, these small character moments that really build things up.
I mentioned.
Incredible finale.
I mentioned with A New Hope that my favorite scene is when Han shows up with the Falcon during the trench run. This has my favorite piece of imagery when the carbonite slams and the smoke clears and you see Vader's face and the Imperial March swells. To me, that's iconic. That's the most iconic Vader image in my mind. So, Jerry, Empire was our number one. Can I do a quick rapid fire?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So, Jerry, your single favorite Star Wars moment. I said mine. What's yours?
Basically everything from the time Han Solo opens that door on Bespin until the end of Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Is that too much?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Your two favorite Star Wars characters.
Admiral Akbar is number one, and probably Chewbacca as number two.
So Chewie's my number two as well. My number one may be a cop-out, but it's Darth Vader. I think he's the most iconic villain in all of cinema. And there's been some great ones since. Thanos has been great. Heath Ledger's Joker has been great. And I could go on with a few more, but Loki was great. But, man, nothing really compares to Lord Vader. Your favorite Star Wars TV show?
At this point, it's Rebels. But if we give Mandalorian another season, it stays good. The Mandalorian could overcome.
So mine is Rebels. I think all the stuff with the World Between Worlds, Twilight of the Apprentice, the Ahsoka Vader stuff, the Obi-Wan Darth Maul stuff, I think it's hard to top seasons 2 and 3 of Rebels. I agree. Your favorite Star Wars novel, it can be canon or Legends. If you just had to pick one or a series of them.
Yeah, this one is really, really tough. This was really tough. I honestly, I don't have a great answer for this. I will say I have a very soft spot. I have a soft spot for Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Mm-hmm. The first one.
Right. Yeah, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, because it was one of the first expanded universe novels I read. And I've read it again a few times over the years, and it's very awkward reading it now because there's like a lot of romance between Luke and Leia.
Yeah.
But at the time when I read it, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the story. It was one of the first ones. Another one I'm gonna throw out there real quick from the new stuff. I really thought that I really thought that Bloodline was a pretty strong book that at least that connected the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, I gotta read that one. I got that one off of eBay up on your recommendation.
Yeah,
so
I thought Bloodline was a pretty strong book there. I also really liked Dooku Jedi Lost. I liked the background of Count Dooku.
Okay, so my favorite I'm going to pick here is going to be the Darth Bane trilogy. It establishes the rule of two. Darth Bane's a great character. He goes from being this guy who's basically a grunt, not a grunt because he's not in the military, but he's kind of an everyman on the Outer Rim. His name was, I believe, was Dessel before he became Darth Bane. His apprentice, Zana, which the rule of two starts with, just absolutely fantastic story. That was Drew Caspian, the guy who wrote Knights of the Old Republic video game as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So he's a fantastic storyteller. So mine would be the Darth Bane trilogy. I know that's 3 books, but I'm cheating a little bit there. So I can't answer this question because I haven't finished it. I've only read Heir to the Empire, and I'm actually about a third of the way through the second book in the Thrawn trilogy. So if you had to pick one, which do you think is the better story? Is it the Star Wars sequel trilogy or the Thrawn trilogy as the kind of subsequent story to the original trilogy?
I definitely think that a lot of the expanded universe stuff ended up being, not all of it, but Thrawn trilogy would have been preferable to me.
Okay. All right. And I still got to make that judgment. So that's going to wrap it up. We love Star Wars. It's great to come together and rejoice in it during this crazy time. Jerry, where can people find more of you on the internet?
Keep checking things out at actionfigurebarbecue.com. That's actionfigurebarbecue, BARBECUE.com.
As for me, find me on Twitter at TheRealBradBell, TheREEL Brad Bell. You can find this podcast at actionfigurebarbecue.com, Geeks Worldwide, TheGWW.com, and of course at its official home at the good old Epic Review. That's epicreview.com. And once again, from the Hollywood foothills of North Carolina, we are out.
That's all I have to say about that.
This has been a production of the GWW Radio Network. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, check out Geeks Worldwide at thegww.com for all the latest news, reviews, and opinions on video games, comics, movies, TV, cosplay, and more. Geeks, assemble!
Earlier in this pod, I teased something that we may be reviewing next week, some kind of comfort food viewing, and that was going to be Avengers Endgame. We'll see if we actually get to do that, but that's what we're hoping for. Thank you. Stay safe.